When Adana's hand struck the old woman's face that morning, the entire village fell silent. Not a single bird sang. Not a single child cried. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And in that terrible silence, as the old woman's head turned slowly back to face her, Adana saw something in those ancient eyes that made her blood turn to ice. Something that whispered of power older than the hills, darker than the deepest well. The old woman smiled, and in that smile was not anger, but pity. "You have struck she who cannot be struck," she said, her voice echoing as if coming from the earth itself. "Before 3 full moons pass, you will understand what you have done." Then she vanished, not walked away, vanished like smoke carried by wind that no longer blew. Adana was born in the small settlement of Ikembe, where the river bent like a sleeping snake and where everyone knew everyone's secrets before they were spoken aloud. She was the only daughter of Okafor, a prosperous yam farmer whose fields stretched further than any other in the village. From childhood, Adana had everything. Her skin glowed like honey in sunlight. Her eyes were large and bright as morning stars. Her body moved with the grace of river reeds dancing in the breeze. She wore the finest wrappers, dyed in indigo and adorned with cowrie shells that clinked when she walked. Her head wrap was always perfectly tied, her neck heavy with beads that her father bought from traders who came from distant lands. But more than her beauty, more than her father's wealth, what defined Adana was her pride. Pride that sat on her shoulders like a crown she had given herself. Pride that made her chin lift high when she walked through the village. Pride that made her believe she was carved from finer clay than everyone else. The villagers whispered about her at the market. "That girl," the older women said, shaking their heads as they sorted through baskets of dried fish, "carries pride like a calabash too full of water. One day, it will spill and drown her." The men who tapped palm wine in the early morning spoke of how she rejected every suitor who came to her father's compound. 5 men this year alone, they counted on their fingers, all good men, farmers, fishermen, even the blacksmith's eldest son. She turns them away like they are beggars asking for scraps. But Adana did not care what they said. She believed herself too beautiful, too special, too blessed to settle for any ordinary man from the settlement. She wanted more. She deserved more. Or so she thought. The old woman had lived at the edge of Ikembe for as long as anyone could remember. Some said she had been there before their grandparents were born. Some said she had watched the great tree in the village center grow from a tiny seed. She lived in a small hut with a thatched roof that always seemed about to collapse, but never did. She wore a wrapper so faded its original color was forgotten, and her head wrap was simple raffia cloth tied in the old way. Her back was bent like a palm tree after many storms, and her skin was wrinkled as dried leather left too long in the sun. Every morning, the old woman walked through the village, slowly, carefully, leaning on a walking stick carved with symbols no one could read anymore. She never asked for anything, never begged, but the kind villagers gave her what they could. A handful of yam, some dried fish, a cup of palm wine. "For the elders we care," they said, "for in them lies the wisdom of generations past." But Adana had no such respect. One morning, as the sun climbed high and the market buzzed with life, Adana walked through the village square wearing a new wrapper of the deepest red, her waist adorned with golden beads that caught the light. Women stopped their trading to look. Men paused their conversations. She walked with her head high, her wrapper swishing, feeling their eyes on her like warmth from a fire. The old woman was standing near the great tree, resting on her walking stick, watching the village life flow around her. As Adana passed, the old woman's eyes followed her, and in those eyes was something ancient, something knowing. The old woman smiled, a small smile that held secrets. "Beautiful girl," the old woman said, her voice cracking like dry leaves underfoot. "Beauty that glows like the sun. But remember, child, the sun that burns brightest at noon casts the darkest shadows at dusk. Adana stopped, turned, her face twisted with anger. Who was this bent, ragged old woman to speak to her, to offer words she had not asked for? Before she could think, before she could stop herself, pride rose in her chest like floodwaters. "How dare you speak to me, old hag?" Adana's voice rang across the market. "You who wear rags and beg for scraps, you dare offer me wisdom?" And then, driven by anger she could not name, pride she could not contain, Adana raised her hand and struck the old woman across the face. The sound echoed through the village like thunder before a storm. The market froze. Women dropped their baskets. Men stopped mid-word. Children ceased their playing. The entire village held its breath. Never in all the generations of Ikembe had anyone struck an elder. And this elder, though none spoke it aloud, was different, special, protected by something they did not understand, but respected anyway. The old woman's head had turned with the blow. Slowly, so slowly, she turned back to face Adana. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, but she smiled, that same small smile that now seemed terrible beyond measure. "You have struck she who cannot be struck," the old woman whispered, though her voice carried to every corner of the village. "Before 3 full moons pass, you will understand what you have done. You will learn that pride comes before a fall so deep, you will beg the earth to swallow you whole." Then she was gone, simply gone. Where she had stood was only dust and silence. Adana laughed, though the sound was hollow. "Superstitious fools," she said to the staring villagers. "It was just a crazy old woman, nothing more." But her hands shook as she wrapped her arms around herself. And deep in her belly, something cold began to grow. That night, the village elders gathered under the great tree. Their faces were grave as they shared a gourd of palm wine. "She has done something terrible," the chief said, his bronze bracelets catching the firelight. That old woman was not what she seemed. We all knew it, though we never spoke of it. She was a guardian, a keeper of balance, and Adana has broken something that cannot be easily mended. 3 days passed. Then the changes began, small at first, so small that Adana almost missed them. She woke to find a single cowrie shell from her favorite necklace had turned black. Just one. She threw it away, thinking it was damaged. The next morning, 2 more were black, then 5. Within a week, every shell she owned had blackened as if burned by invisible fire. She threw them all away, bought new ones from traders. But these too turned black the moment she touched them. The villagers noticed. Of course they noticed. At the market, women whispered behind their hands, "Do you see? The curse has begun." Mothers pulled their children away when Adana walked by. Men averted their eyes, afraid to meet her gaze. 2 weeks after striking the old woman, Adana woke to find her beautiful wrapper, the red one she had worn that cursed day, had turned to rags overnight. Not torn, not damaged, simply aged, as if 100 years had passed in darkness. She opened her wooden chest where she kept her finest clothes. Every wrapper inside had suffered the same fate. Faded, thin, threadbare, the cloths that had cost her father's wealth now looked like what beggars wore. "Father," she cried, running to Okafor's hut. "My clothes! Something is wrong with my clothes!" Her father looked at her with eyes full of sorrow. "I know, my daughter, I know. The entire village knows. You struck the guardian of Ikembe. You raised your hand against she who keeps the balance between the seen and unseen worlds. And now the unseen world is taking its payment." But Adana refused to believe, refused to accept. "It is coincidence," she insisted. "Bad luck, nothing more." She demanded her father buy her new wrappers, new beads, new head wraps. He did, though his heart was heavy. But every item she touched, every piece of cloth she wore, every string of beads she placed around her neck, aged and faded within hours. Soon, she had nothing to wear but the most basic wrapper, simple and colorless, like those worn by the poorest women in the village. The villagers shook their heads as she passed. "See how the proud have fallen," they murmured at the river as they washed clothes. "She who wore gold now wears rags. She who walked with her head in the clouds now cannot lift her eyes from the ground." 1 month had passed since that terrible day in the market. Adana no longer walked through the village with her head high. She hurried from place to place, her faded wrapper clutched tight around her, avoiding the stares and whispers. But the curse was not finished with her, not nearly finished. She began to notice the way people looked at her changing, not just with judgment or pity, but with something else, something that made her skin crawl. She looked in the polished bronze mirror her father had given her and gasped. Her face, her beautiful face that had been the pride of Ikembe, was changing. Not dramatically, not like a sudden illness. But day by day her features were becoming sharper, harder, less pleasing to the eye. Her skin, which had glowed like honey in sunlight, was growing dull and rough. Her eyes, once bright as morning stars, were becoming smaller, harder, filled with the same pride and anger that had made her strike the old woman. "You are becoming on the outside what you always were on the inside," her father said one evening, tears streaming down his weathered face. "The curse is revealing the truth, my daughter. It is showing everyone the ugliness of your heart." Word spread through Ikembe like wildfire through dry grass. The beautiful Adana was beautiful no more. The men who had once sought her hand now walked past her compound without a glance. The women who had envied her now spoke of her with pity. "The old woman's curse," they said, grinding cassava in their mortars. "Pride always has its price. Always." 2 months had passed. Adana could no longer bear to look at her reflection. What looked back at her was a stranger, a woman with harsh features, dull skin, eyes filled with bitterness and fear. She who had rejected 5 good men now could not catch the eye of even the poorest farmer's son. She wore rags, her beauty was gone, and with it, her pride had transformed into something darker. Shame so deep it felt like drowning. She stopped going to the market, stopped walking through the village. She hid in her father's compound, venturing out only when necessary, and even then only when the sun was setting and shadows could hide her transformation. But Okafor, her father, was suffering too. His yam fields, which had always been the most productive in Ikembe, began to fail. The plants withered as if the earth itself had turned against them. His goats grew sick and died. His wealth, built over generations, was draining away like water through cracked clay. The villagers spoke in hushed tones at the palm wine bar. "The curse spreads like roots beneath the ground. It does not stop with Adana alone. Her father's house is being emptied of all blessings." On the night of the 3rd full moon, exactly as the old woman had predicted, Adana could bear no more. She had lost everything: her beauty, her pride, her father's wealth, the respect of the village. She was nothing now, less than nothing. In desperation, she did what she should have done 3 months before. She went to seek the old woman. The night was darker than any she remembered. Clouds covered the moon and stars, as if the sky itself had turned its face away. Adana walked to the edge of the village where the old woman's hut had stood. But where the hut should have been was only empty ground. Not abandoned, not collapsed. Simply gone, as if it had never existed at all. "Old woman!" Adana cried into the darkness, her voice breaking. "Please, I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I did. Please, show yourself. Let me make amends." Only silence answered. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you hear your own heartbeat. Then, from the forbidden forest beyond the village boundary, where no one dared to walk after dark, came a voice. "Come, child, come and face what you have become." Adana hesitated. The forest was sacred ground. dangerous ground. Ground where spirits walked and mortals who entered without permission rarely returned. But what choice did she have? She had nothing left to lose. She stepped into the darkness between the trees. The forest seemed to close around her like water. Every step took her deeper into shadows that moved and breathed. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, whispers in languages she could not understand. The air itself felt thick, heavy with ancient power. And then she saw light. A small fire burning in a clearing, and beside it, sitting on a carved wooden stool, was the old woman. But she was not as Adana remembered. Yes, she was still old, still bent, still wearing a faded wrapper and simple head wrap. But around her, the air shimmered with power. Her eyes glowed with inner light. And when she looked at Adana, it was with the gaze of something far more than human. "You come seeking mercy," the old woman said, her voice resonating like drums in the distance. "But first, you must understand what you have done." The old woman stood, and as she did, she seemed to grow taller, stronger. "I am Neka of the old ways. I am the guardian placed here by the ancestors to watch over Ikembe. For 3 generations, I have walked among you, testing hearts, measuring souls, keeping balance between the worlds. I appear as weak, as poor, as helpless. And those with good hearts give freely. But those with pride, with cruelty, with hardness in their spirits, they reveal themselves. As you revealed yourself, Adana." Tears streamed down Adana's changed face. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, I beg you, lift this curse. I will do anything, anything." Neka studied her with those glowing eyes. "The curse I placed on you was not punishment, child. It was truth. I took away your beauty so you could see that beauty alone has no value. I took away your wealth so you could understand that gold cannot buy wisdom or respect. I changed your face so that others would see what you really were inside, a heart full of pride, cruelty, and disrespect for those you thought beneath you. But I have learned." Adana fell to her knees on the forest floor, her hands clasped in supplication. "I have learned that beauty fades, that wealth is nothing, that pride destroys everything it touches. Please, grandmother, please, give me a chance to prove I have changed." The old woman was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled. The forest whispered its ancient songs. Finally, Neka spoke. "There is a way, but it will cost you everything you once valued. Are you willing to pay that price?" "Yes," Adana whispered. "Yes, anything." "Then return to the village. Go to the poorest compound in Ikembe, where Chima the fisherman lives alone because he is too poor to attract a wife. His nets are torn, his hut leaks when it rains, and he goes to sleep hungry more nights than not. Offer yourself to him as a wife. Live humbly, work hard, serve without complaint. Care for him as if he were a chief. Show through your actions, not your words, that you have learned what true value means. If you can do this with a genuine heart, if you can find joy in simplicity and service, then on the day you truly mean it, the curse will lift." Adana's heart sank. Chima the fisherman, the poorest man in Ikembe, the man who had once asked her father for her hand and whom she had laughed at, mocked, sent away with cruel words. The man who still lowered his eyes when she passed, remembering her rejection. To go to him now, to offer herself, would be the ultimate humiliation, the final destruction of her pride. But what choice did she have? She nodded, unable to speak, and Neka vanished. The fire went out, and Adana stood alone in the darkness of the forbidden forest. The next morning, the entire village gathered when word spread. Adana, daughter of Okafor, the wealthy farmer, walked through Ikembe wearing her tattered wrapper, her changed face bare of shame now, walking straight to the poorest section of the village where Chima's small, leaning hut stood beside the river. Chima was mending his nets when she arrived, his hands rough and scarred from years of hard work. He looked up, startled to see her, his eyes immediately dropping to the ground. "Adana," he said softly, respect still in his voice, despite everything she had done to him. "Chima," she said, and her voice was different now, softer, humble. "I have come to ask your forgiveness, and to offer myself as your wife, if you will have me. I know I do not deserve your kindness. I know I rejected you with cruelty and mocked you before the entire village. But I am asking now, not as the proud girl I was, but as the humbled woman I have become." The villagers gasped. Women whispered frantically. Men shook their heads in disbelief. The chief himself had come to watch, his bronze bracelets glinting in the morning sun. This was unprecedented. Unbelievable. Chima looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw her changed face, her ragged wrapper, her bent head. But more than that, he saw something in her eyes that had never been there before. Humility, true humility. And beneath that, something that looked like the beginnings of genuine care. "I accept," he said simply, and the village erupted in whispers. The months that followed were the hardest of Adana's life. She, who had never worked now, rose before dawn to fetch water from the river. She, who had never cooked, now learned to pound yam in a mortar until her arms ached. She, who had never served anyone, now mended Chima's nets with her once soft hands until they bled. She cleaned the small hut. She tended the tiny vegetable garden. She did everything a wife should do and more. At first, the villagers watched with skepticism. "This will not last," they said at the market. "Pride like hers does not die easily. She is only acting until the curse breaks. Then she will return to her old ways." Mothers warned their daughters, "Do not think this is real change. Watch and see. Pride is like a weed. It always grows back." But as the weeks passed, something shifted. Adana did not complain, not once. When women passed and whispered cruel words, she lowered her head and continued her work. When she saw the men who had once courted her now walking with their beautiful wives, she felt not envy, but something else. Contentment in her simple life. Chima was kind to her, kinder than anyone had been since the curse began. He shared his meager food equally, never raising his voice, treating her with a respect she knew she did not deserve, but that he gave freely anyway. One evening, as they sat by the fire eating simple yam and vegetable stew from a shared calabash, Adana looked at Chima, really looked at him. She saw the goodness in his eyes, the gentleness in his calloused hands, the quiet strength that came from years of hardship faced with dignity. And she felt something bloom in her chest, something warm and unfamiliar, not pride, not vanity, but real affection, maybe even love. "Thank you," she whispered, "for accepting me when I deserved nothing but rejection." Chima smiled, and in that smile was everything good about humanity. "We all deserve a second chance, Adana, even those who think they need none." The villagers began to change their minds. 6 months after Adana had gone to live with Chima, women at the river spoke differently. "Have you seen her? She works harder than any wife in the village. Her hands are rough as tree bark now, but she smiles, truly smiles." The men drinking palm wine nodded. "Chima is blessed. She cares for him as if he were the chief himself. This is real change, real transformation." Then came the day that changed everything. It was market day, and Adana was carrying vegetables from their small garden to trade for dried fish. As she walked, she saw a young girl, no more than 10 years old, struggling to carry a heavy clay pot of water. The girl was thin, poorly dressed, clearly from one of the poorest families in the village. The pot was too heavy for her small arms, and Adana could see she was about to drop it. Without thinking, without hesitation, Adana set down her basket and rushed to help. "Here, child," she said gently, taking the pot. "Let me carry it for you. Where do you live?" The girl's eyes went wide with surprise and fear. Everyone knew who Adana was, knew about the curse. But Adana smiled, a true smile, and the girl relaxed. At the edge of the village, near the forest, she whispered. "Then I will walk with you," Adana said. And she did, carrying the heavy pot the entire way, chatting with the girl about the birds singing in the trees and the flowers blooming beside the path. When they reached the girl's tiny hut, her mother came out, shocked to see Adana there. "Thank you," the mother whispered, tears in her eyes. "No one has shown us such kindness in so long." "We must all help each other," Adana said simply. "We are all part of the same village, are we not?" And she meant it. With her whole heart, she meant it. That night, as Adana and Chima lay on their sleeping mat in their small hut, something changed. A warmth spread through Adana's body, starting from her heart and flowing outward like water from a spring. She gasped, sitting up, and Chima lit a small palm oil lamp. In its flickering light, they both saw the transformation. Adana's face was changing again, but not back to what it had been. No, she was becoming something different, something better. Her features softened, but it was a softer beauty than before, a beauty that came from within, from kindness and humility and genuine care for others. Her skin began to glow, not with the artificial brightness of vanity, but with the true light of a good heart. Her eyes, which had become hard and small, now opened wide and clear, filled with wisdom that her younger self could never have possessed. Chima stared, his mouth open in wonder. "Adana, you are beautiful, but it is a different beauty than before. This beauty is real. It comes from your soul." And then, as suddenly as she had vanished 3 months ago, Neka appeared in their small hut. But now she did not appear as an old woman. She stood tall and strong, her wrapper glowing with colors that seemed to shift in the lamplight, her head wrap adorned with symbols that pulsed with ancient power. "You have passed the test," Neka said, her voice filled with pride. "You have learned what so few learn until it is too late. That true beauty comes not from the face, but from the heart. That true wealth is not in gold and cowrie shells, but in kindness and humility. That pride is a poison that destroys everything it touches, while humility is water that gives life." She raised her hand, and light filled the small hut. "Your curse is lifted, Adana. But more than that, you are blessed. You are blessed with understanding, with wisdom, with a beauty that will never fade because it comes from who you truly are inside. And Chima, good and patient Chima, you are blessed as well. Your nets will always be full. Your home will prosper. Because you showed kindness when others showed cruelty. You accepted when others would have rejected. You saw the person beneath the surface when others saw only the surface itself." Neka smiled at them both, and in that smile was the love of the ancestors, the approval of the spirits, the blessing of the old ways. "Live well, children. Love each other. Serve your community, and remember always the lessons you have learned." Then she was gone, vanished like morning mist when the sun rises. The next morning, the entire village of Ikembe gathered in the square. Chima and Adana walked together, hand in hand, and the villagers gasped. Adana's transformation was visible to all. Her beauty had returned, but it was a beauty that made people want to be near her, not just to admire her. A beauty that came with warmth and kindness in her eyes, with a genuine smile that reached her heart. But more miraculous still, Chima's small hut had transformed overnight into a proper home. His nets, which had been torn and useless, were now whole and strong. His fishing boat, which had been barely able to float, was now sturdy and reliable. And that very morning, his nets had filled with more fish than he had ever caught in his entire life. The villagers understood then. The curse had not just been punishment, it had been teaching. And the blessing that followed was reward for a lesson truly learned. "Pride comes before a fall," the elders said, gathering under the great tree, sharing palm wine and wisdom. But humility lifts us higher than we ever imagined. This is the way of things. This is the balance. Adana and Chima lived long and happily. Their home was always open to those in need. Adana, who had once turned away suitors with cruelty, now welcomed everyone with kindness. She became known throughout Ikembe not for her beauty, though she remained beautiful until her hair turned white, but for her wisdom and compassion. Children ran to her without fear. The poor came to her compound knowing they would be fed. And always, always, she wore a simple wrapper and head wrap, her only adornment a single strand of beads that Chima had given her, and which she treasured more than all the gold and cowrie shells in the world. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when she sat with Chima by their fire, she would remember that terrible day in the market when pride had driven her to strike an old woman. She would remember the curse that followed, the lessons she learned, and the blessings she received. And she would whisper to herself the words that had become her truth. True beauty comes from the heart. True wealth is in kindness. And humility is the greatest treasure any person can possess. Years later, when Adana herself became old, she would tell the story to the young women of the village, warning them of pride's poison and humility's power. And the villagers would nod and say, "This is truth. This is wisdom. This is the lesson we must never forget." And so they lived in peace, and so they learned that what we plant, we will harvest. That evil done in secret always comes to light. That pride goes before a fall, and humility before blessing. And they lived happily ever after. The end.